My talk relates to the section on the grant application that asks about your knowledge mobilization, dissemination, and the likely impact of your research. Now, dissemination, research outputs and outcomes, and the impact of your research may seem in the distant future, but you will be asked to detail this information in your grant application. So this quote is from Chris Whitty, who until 2021 also had overall responsibility for the NIHR. So think about how you're going to get your research findings to the people who need to use them. From the onset, talk to those who will be interested in your research and can enable you to achieve impact. Also, talk to those who may block you. So talk to patient groups. Talk to gatekeepers who may have huge influence, although low interest in your research. Gatekeepers can ultimately open doors for you to those who are most likely to benefit from your research. This could, for example, be hard to reach individuals. I'm referring to the NIHR, but it will be relevant to other funding bodies. Think of who you will be disseminating your research findings to. How do you plan to get the information across to them? What do you think your research outputs will be? What is their likely impact on patients, the NHS, and the public? Funders understand the impact of research takes time. These are the criteria used by the NIHR funding stream, all the funding streams, when assessing your plans for knowledge mobilization, dissemination, and impact. Now, all the web links in this presentation are in your PDF handout after my slides. There's a variability in what is meant by terms like dissemination, knowledge mobilization, and impact. I'll discuss in the context of the NIHR. Dissemination is you and your research team, including PPR representatives, getting your research findings to your planned audiences. Have a communication strategy so that you can reach the people who need to know about your research, so your knowledge users. Knowledge mobilization is the process that paves the way to impact through collaboration with key stakeholders throughout your research. So when designing your research, you need to plan how to share it with people who can use it to effect change. So describe how you plan to achieve intended outcomes and impact as part of your knowledge mobilization plan. So you should consider who your key stakeholders and knowledge users are, what knowledge mobilization activities you will use to actively engage with key stakeholders and knowledge users. Your research needs to reach those who can share and integrate knowledge to improve practice and services. So the ultimate aim is to have real-world impact. And making plans for knowledge mobilization will ensure your research reaches the people who can improve practice and services and maximize impact. A challenge for the research community is that effective interventions should not take 16 years between receiving funding and realizing the health gain impact in wider clinical practice. Implementation is the practical process of integrating your research into everyday practice and policy. This may, for example, be new products or services. This article in the link provides some insight into theories, models, and frameworks to help you systematically plan for implementation. When talking about impact, it is a change the research will make. The pathway to impact needs planning using the process of knowledge mobilization and dissemination. The impact of research is rarely maximized. Research findings often do not reach the people who can act on them, and they are not always used in practice. Outcomes are considered changes or findings that occur because of your research activities. They could include improvements in your research participants' quality of life, workforce changes, or economic benefits. These can be achieved within the lifetime of a funding award. Impact is the longer-term outcome of your research. It includes real-world changes at personal, organizational, or societal level. You can use a schematic diagram to describe the logic underpinning how your research will achieve its intended outputs, outcomes, and impact. diagram could be a logic model or theory of change. This is an example of a logic model from the NIHR Research Programme for Social Care. It is important to initially think of what the impact of your research may be. These are common words used by organisations when they define impact. Both these definitions refer to research impact extending beyond academia and emphasise the contribution of research to society and the economy. The vision of the NIHR is for research to improve the health and wealth of the nation. Impact is a longer-term outcome of your research. It is the provable benefit of research. It's broadly defined as a contribution, effect either positive or negative, or benefit that research makes to knowledge, people's health and well-being, how health and care are delivered. Ultimately, it is the benefits to our society and economy. Impact is a change backed up by the evidence, making things different, better, safer. It doesn't have to be big, just meaningful. Generating impact from research takes time. It often comprises a series of small incremental changes with more research required before change can happen. Impact is the term for the change or benefits. Knowledge mobilisation is the process that gets you there and is made up of activities like engagement, dissemination, and commercialisation. Impact includes these benefits, including any commercial return that could contribute to economic growth. Think about the wide range of people who might be interested in your research findings. Map each impact goal to who you think will benefit. Then identify the specific engagement activity that is needed to enable you to deliver the benefit to the people or groups you've identified. And how will you measure the broader societal and economic impacts resulting from research? Generating meaningful research impact requires you to have conversations even before the design stage of your research. Talk to the people who are likely to be interested in your research. Consider how to engage with and involve research users at every stage of the research. As well as patients, carers, and members of the public, research users may include commissioners, voluntary sector professionals, managers, and clinicians of various backgrounds. Think of anyone else who is crucial if the intended change is to happen within practice, policy making, third sector, or private sector organisations. Engaging with research users and identifying potential impacts from the outset will help you to plan processes by which your research may, directly or indirectly, lead to change. So planning includes considering the kinds of impact you're hoping to achieve, such as what might change, for whom, to what extent, and when. So your engagement and impact plan should outline how you will engage with research users to deliver impact from your research. How about a read of this cartoon? You'll need to describe the main knowledge or outputs from your research and how they will be presented, disseminated, and used. So set aside time to think of an effective plan to communicate and disseminate your research findings to others. Will this plan maximise the potential impact of the proposed research? Now, these web links will help you do this. What follows is a summary focusing on the NIHR, so always check the funding body guidance. Think carefully about the objectives of your dissemination and engagement. They may change throughout the course of a research study. For example, at the beginning of your study, you may wish to engage with audiences that can help you shape your research and approach. Once your findings are available, your audience focus may expand to include policymakers, practitioners, or members of the public with the hope to raising awareness and changing practice. Your objectives should avoid focusing on the output, for example, to produce a blog, and concentrate on the desired impact, for example, raise awareness of the findings to clinicians and health policymakers leading to change in practice. Be realistic and pragmatic. A feasibility study is unlikely to change practice, but you can use the results to raise awareness and gain support from other centres to take part in a future definitive trial. Seems obvious, but the better you know your audiences, the more you can tailor your communications to their specific interests and needs, and the more effective it will be. When and how will you engage with your audience? Where do they get their information from? It might be through support group, conferences, journals, email, websites, blogs, and social media. Try to stay connected with your audience throughout the research. Ideally, involve them from the planning stage through to dissemination of your research findings. This will help to create a waiting audience for your research outputs and then hopefully influence the impact of your research. You will need to align with the NIHR research inclusion requirements to consider and mitigate, where possible, barriers to co-working and engagement. You could map out the people and groups you've identified on a stakeholder grid, plotting interest against influence from low to high. It will help you understand how much influence each group has on the interpretation, dissemination, and implementation of your research, and their interest in your research's progress and findings, and in facilitating its uptake. Stakeholders who are high interest and high influence should be a priority focus. Those with high interest and low influence should be kept informed. Those with low interest and high influence should be kept satisfied. Minimal effort should be spent on those with low interest and low influence. The NIHR is accountable to the Department of Health and Social Care, and it needs to evidence that your research will make a difference to the government and society in general. The NIHR and other funders need to be able to demonstrate they are good custodians of public funds to ensure continued investment of public spending in research. There's not one single definition of impact. Ultimately, for the NIHR, impact is about making a meaningful difference to people's lives through research, so people can live healthier and happier lives. Describe the impacts you aim to achieve as a direct result of the project. Consider how any smaller, more immediate effects may mature over time into larger scale or more significant effects. What steps will be needed to achieve these? Impacts may include, but are not restricted to, these here. As far as possible, indicate anticipated timescales for any benefits and a quantitative estimate of their scale. In 2024, the NIHR released these very useful short animations on impact. Some impacts from research will happen by chance if you don't do anything and just wait, but the full potential of your research may not be realised. Knowledge mobilisation is a process to get your research out to those who need it most. It broadly encompasses dissemination, knowledge transfer, and knowledge exchange. You will need to disseminate your research and its findings to those who need it most. Effective dissemination is about you getting your research findings to people who can make use of them, and how this will maximise the potential benefit and impact of the research. There is an expectation that results are published, but the NIHR appreciate this might not always be possible due to, for example, IP restrictions. Remember to consider other dissemination activities and request funding for these. Dissemination in the past was typically about doing the research, writing a paper, and presenting at a conference. Journal articles are an important output, but it needs to be more than just targeting research audiences. Your dissemination plan will still, however, need to be realistic. For a feasibility or early clinical study, for example, it's not expected to be extensive. Think about the main message from your research findings that you want to disseminate. How can you frame this message so it will have a particular meaning and importance to your target audience? To achieve this, use the right language and focus on the possible impact of your research on a clinician's clinical practice or on a patient's daily life. Produce targeted outputs that are in an appropriate format for the user. Consider a range of tailored outputs for each audience. It's also important to include details of how you will share the progress and findings of your research with study participants. The term outputs refers to any tangible product of the research. So, what do you intend to produce from your research? NIHR has a broad definition of what constitutes an output. They can be written, audiovisual, electronic, or verbally presented. This slide lists a host of outputs to consider. Think of the potential outcomes of these. For impact, simply making outputs available will be insufficient. You need to consider and outline the process you will use to identify and engage with key parties. The format of dissemination could include any of these examples. The link shows you some examples of webinars. Describe how your outputs will enter the health and care system or wider society. Where possible, consider how the work will be adopted and implemented longer term. If the outputs from your research are likely to be commercial, describe the proposed route to market or how you plan on developing this. Describe who is needed to take it forward and the relationship you have with these parties. Consider what further funding or support may be needed at the end of the project to maximise impact. What are the possible barriers for further research, development and adoption and implementation? There could be issues around intellectual property, such as copyright and patents, or possible regulatory hurdles. Describe the difficulties which may be faced in generating impact from your research. These may be difficulties you will face yourself, or are there likely to be challenges faced by clinicians to implement the findings? What are the challenges for getting your research implemented in terms of acceptability, accessibility and feasibility? How will you address these? Consider suitable timings for your dissemination and for sharing interim findings if it's possible. If it's a fellowship application and you plan a systematic review in the early phase, then look to publish this before the research ends. What resources will you need to deliver your dissemination plan and ultimately to maximise the impact of your research? Include costing for this in your application. Think about the expertise in your team and whether you need additional help for dissemination. Could you benefit from attending a course on dissemination? And if so, put funding in for this. Would you benefit from liaising with the NIHR or the institution's press team to send out a press release when you receive funding, at the start of a clinical trial, and when you publish? The University of Southampton press team sent out this press release: Manuka honey curbs activity and growth of bacteria. It was picked up by national newspapers and the BBC and other news agencies, resulting in a global interest from patients and public wanting to take part in the research and from other researchers. The University of Liverpool recently sent out this press release related to an NIHR I4I funded project that we supported of a novel new technology. It was picked up by other news outlets. Patients and public should be involved in research from the design to dissemination of the research findings. So engage with them early. They're powerful voices. They're likely to be good advocates for your research. They should be involved in the planning and preparation for dissemination. As part of the research costing, consider including the training of PPI members in public speaking. There could be current cultural and political issues you need to consider. Think about how your dissemination might be perceived by different groups. Think about what the risks are to your dissemination plan, such as intellectual property rights. If necessary, seek advice before dissemination from your funder or a university or hospital if they're involved. What might be the most effective way to communicate your message to your target audience? This could be your own study website, social media, charity websites, dissemination event. Try to connect with people in your audience who can be an advocate for your findings. Have a read of this. These are the download statistics for my PhD from King's College London Digital Library between August 2014 and November 2022. Unfortunately, they've stopped giving the statistics, so I can't update it. But I had no dissemination plan, and during this 8.5-year period, there were 171 downloads. I wrote this theme review for the NIHR in 2018. The then Dissemination Centre and I created a structured dissemination plan, and the theme review was downloaded over 15,000 times in just over 1 year. This pales into insignificance, however, when my middle daughter made a short TikTok video about basically nothing that had 1 million hits in just over 1 day and nearly 2 million in a week. It just demonstrates the potential power and reach of social media. As said, social media can be a tool to help you engage with patients, researchers, and funders. Be clear about the message you want to say and be careful with the content of your message. Social media can direct people to your website. Consider a blog of your article. Consider a podcast. Consider a YouTube video when your article is published. NIHR TV gives examples of videos about research findings, as well as lots more resources of interest. You can see that the 2025 NIHR Impact Prizes can be found here. These next 2 slides give you links to lots of resources that detail how to communicate your research to help increase influence and impact. Within them, you'll find lots of other links to resources, particularly the last web link. The NIHR Research 2025 link tells you what the NIHR is interested in when it reports the outputs, outcomes, and impacts of NIHR research. The NIHR Impact Prizes for 2025 celebrate researchers whose work has transformed people's lives or promoted economic growth. They include examples of impactful innovation. It'll be worth monitoring impact prizes over future years. For example of what has been written in the anticipated impact and dissemination part of the scientific abstract, you can search the NIHR funding and awards web link. I did an advanced search for RFPB from 1st of January 25 to the 12th of May 2026, and there were 176 results. You can open any of the funded projects and then open the abstract, and you can find examples of summaries. Ensure you search more recently because of recent changes to the NIHR application form. So not all will have the anticipated impact and dissemination as a subheading in the abstract. This is an example from the search I made on the previous slide. So the second study on the slide starting September 26. It's only the summary contained in the abstract, so the application would have more detail, which unfortunately you won't be able to see. They do, however, give you some insight into what information is expected. Remember that effective dissemination is about you getting the findings of your research to the people who can make use of them without delay. Remember to ask for funding to do this as part of your grant application. If you're doing an early small-scale study, then your dissemination plan is not expected to be extensive, as the results are likely to be way off patient benefit. But what is your long-term vision and trajectory to patient benefit? Explain how the findings from your research will be shared with or disseminated to others, and how this will maximise the potential impact of the proposed research. And think of anyone else who can shift your research results into practice to result in a meaningful difference to people's lives.